Hello everybody and welcome to our second Computer Science Principles lecture, and this time we'll be discussing the Explore performance task. So I hope you enjoyed the first lecture. We talked a bit about just like a basic introduction to the tasks as well as the lectures, and obviously the explore, create tasks, and just how you're supposed to prepare for the tasks as a whole. So now, today we're going to be going over the explore performance task. Now your goal is to research existing computing innovation. So this is the one where you're doing your own independent research, not the one where you're creating anything. Now, per College Board, what they said, and this is a kind of long definition, so I'll just quickly paraphrase it. You're basically researching something in the computer world that has affected society. Simple enough, right? Now, this innovation, I personally recommend it be something that's basic enough that you can just explain very, very simply, but something that's also complex enough that it has meaning. And you want it to be something that can be researched thoroughly because you'll obviously be needing 3 sources and 2 of which that have been published in the last year. Now, just a basic checklist, and I really recommend that you write this down because it's going to come up later in the activity and then while you're going to be making your artifact and your essays. The innovation should probably have a modern relevance. You want one to be able to show applications of this innovation, and if it's modernly being used today, you can have easier examples to bring up. And then obviously when it comes to those 2 sources that you're going to be needing, it's going to be easier to find something that's being used right now and sources having to do with that than something that was used, let's say, 20 years ago and it isn't used anymore. You want it to obviously have an impact on either society, economy, or culture, and you want to make sure that for any of these categories, it's both positively and negatively. This is mandatory. It needs to have an impact, and it needs to be both positive and negative, and that's because there's an essay that directly asks this. It needs to input and it needs to output data. So take something in, give something out. Most of these innovations already do that. Just make sure 100% that your innovation does that. It needs to have a valid data storage or privacy concern. So not everything is perfect. Hopefully your innovation isn't. And it needs to have a problem that is brought up in terms of how it stores the data or how, like, let's say some hacker or something could get into the data. You need to address that within your essay, and so therefore you need to make sure your innovation has something like that within it. And then of course for the sources, you need a minimum of 3 sources. You can obviously have more. You need at least 2 of them that have been published within the last academic year, and then at least 2 of them that are accessible online or in print. And there's something I didn't mention on these slides, but I really want to make sure you guys understand. Whenever you're referencing your sources, they're gonna have to be referenced in line. So what that basically means, in case you've ever seen like that little 1 or 2 that they put on top of text, whenever you mention something and you want to cite where you got like a certain statistic or some specific kind of research, you're going to basically put that little inline citation, and you'll make a number that directly corresponds to one of the sources in the part E of the essays. Now, here's some examples of innovations. You have high-scoring ones that have been used in past performance tasks. You can search some of these up on YouTube if you want. Like, for example, Uber, Bluetooth, Skype, Wi-Fi, YouTube. All these are, you can see they vary in what they do, where they come from, and who they offer, or like who the service directly affects and what they affect. And the list really just goes on. There's a lot of different innovations, and sometimes they're just a lot easier to find than you might think they are. But I'm going to give you a little tip. Try to be original. Generally, these judges are going to want to make sure that you have something that doesn't necessarily come up like, oh, let me just do a quick Google search and I'll be able to find it. Choose something that is a bit not something you'll hear about. And you'll be able to see that in my innovation, which has been heard about, but it's not as common in terms of like what people talk about when it comes to like apps or whatever it may be. And what I chose to do my task on was data compression. Now, data compression, it's what's responsible for making zip files, compressing videos and audio, and it's basically responsible for getting a lot of things that are huge to you a lot quicker. Like YouTube would not exist if data compression did not exist. That's how important data compression is. Now here's why this was a good innovation. It does have modern relevance. Like I just said, it's used in digital media services, in storing archives, and a lot more. And it has an impact on society, both positive and negative. Positive, I just said it, it makes things a lot easier to access, especially when they're huge content files. But in terms of negative, there's a kind of compression called lossy compression, which basically means when you make a file smaller, some of the file quality is lost in the process. So we could, not every compression is like this, but one negative side effect of this is that some compression has caused us to lose file quality in the process. Now, it also does input and output data, of course. It inputs very large files and it outputs smaller files. And it has a valid storage concern regarding the lossy compression and losing some of the data that is stored. And of course, if you just do some Google searches, you'll find some modern and relevant sources of information for research. Now, here is an activity for you. You want to write down 2 computational innovations that are relevant today. You're asking, but Arek, why 2? Why do you need 2? And I'll explain right now, because 2 is always better than 1 in the sense that we're drafting ideas right now. And you're going to complete the following list for both. Basically the same questions that I said earlier in terms of what makes a good innovation. Is it relevant today? Does it have a negative and positive impact on society, add an economy or culture over there? Does it input and output data? Is there a concern about data storage or data privacy with this innovation? And then can you find valid sources? And then list down all 3, with 2 being from within the last year. Once you've done this for both innovations, choose the one that fully answers the most questions. Next time, we're going to be going over the computational artifact, the first part of your performance task that you're going to need to upload. What is it? How do I create one? And what the AP rules and guidelines are for the artifact. And then some tips on creating a quality artifact and a little look at what I did for my year. Thank you very much and hope to see you again next time.